In this video today, I'm going to talk to you about the long-awaited Canon R1. So I just spent about a month in Costa Rica, actually a little over a month, with the Canon R1. And I shot this camera alongside my R3 and the R5 and R5 II. And I'm just going to tell you in this video, this is not going to be a super technical review. You can find all of those, reviewers that do their lab tests with the paper charts and the sharpness and all that stuff. There's plenty of those out there. What I'm going to talk to you about is a real world experience in one of the most extreme climates that I've ever been in my life. It was just nonstop pouring rain for about a month, and it was hot, it was humid at times, and it's dark, so I think that this is going to be a true test of what this camera can do, my thoughts on it, from a wildlife photography and videography standpoint. And I'm just going to be honest and let you know my thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like. And if you want the technical stuff, like I said, you can check that out elsewhere. So, all right, let's get into it. So the first thing that I liked about this camera is the reason that I bought it, the low light performance. Like I said, being down in Costa Rica in the rain, it's already dark most of the time as it is when you're in the rainforest. But when it's raining like this, it just makes everything that much harder. And this camera, it truly excelled at high ISO performance. I actually was able to get a shot at 32,000 ISO, this one here of a Quetzal flying up to feed. Granted, it took some cleaning up and topaz denoise and things like that, but 32,000 ISO, I think I could actually print that photo. It looks that good. So low light performance, fantastic. High ISO performance, phenomenal. That's the strength of the 24 megapixel. And I know that that's the elephant in the room. It's, why did Canon go with 24 megapixels? Listen, I also brought the R5 II down here. I loved it. It's every bit as good as the R1 is, as far as performance goes. So if you want the high megapixel camera, just get the R5 II, throw a grip on it, and you're there. I mean, we have the luxury, despite what the haters will tell you, we have two quote unquote flagship cameras in Canon. It's the same thing that Sony does with the A1 and the A9. You have the best of both worlds. You have both options. So if 24 megapixels isn't enough for you, go for the R5 II. You're not going to be disappointed. With the R1, I was regularly able to shoot at 10,000 ISO without even thinking about it. All right, the next thing on the list, PreCapture. What a game changer this is. I absolutely love having PreCapture finally in the Canon high-end cameras. I was able to get not only series of, like, for instance, these macaws flying, but also once the PreCapture kicked in, I was able to even get them taking off right out of the nest, for example. Hummingbirds landing where they're so fast and you're just that split second off. But now with the PreCapture, with the half a second, you're getting all that action. And then with video, you have the 3 to 5 seconds, which is huge. So, listen, the PreCapture is not flawless in the R1 and the R5 II in the way that it needs to be set up. I wish you could have a way that it was just either always on or always off the way that Sony does, and that you could toggle that to a button. I do have a strong feeling that Canon will update that in a firmware at the time of making this video in case that does happen. That's not the case as of now, but I would love to have that mapped to a button where I could just turn it on and it's on, turn it off when it's off, because you just don't realize how quickly all of that stuff adds up. I have shot in about 5 weeks of being down there close to 200,000 photos with this camera already. It's a tremendous amount of photos that the PreCapture adds to shooting when you're shooting at 40 frames per second, but it's definitely a game-changing feature. Next up on the list, we finally, thank you Canon, finally have dual CF Express card slots. No more SD card. Thank heavens. Don't need to harp on this for a while. It's pretty straightforward. I'm so happy. I wish the R5 would have had this. It's actually more needed in the R5 than the R1, but thrilled to have it. So thank you, Canon, for listening on that one. So one of my biggest things that I don't like about this camera, if you're coming from the R3, they've moved the delete button down kind of below, and they've added the rate button on the bottom bar here. And so now, just muscle memory, I'm constantly hitting the rate button instead of the delete button, which is annoying. And they've also changed the way that the power switch toggles. So again, it's quirky, you know, and if you never had an R3, this isn't an issue, but it's just a muscle memory thing. It's just kind of annoying when you're going back and forth between 2 or 3 cameras to have buttons all in different places and doing different things. So yeah, just little quirks, but just another thing that I don't like. For me personally, I shoot a ton of video, possibly even more video than photos these days. So the biggest upgrade in this camera for me, as well as the R5, was the fact that they added a true 120 frames per second. The contract work that I do, if there's any chance of slow motion, I'm always instructed to shoot in 120 frames per second. If there's not, generally it's 24 frames per second. So in the old versions of Canon cameras, if you shot 120 frames per second video, it would by default shrink that into a 30 frame per second video, and it would play it back at 25% speed. So all those frames were still there. You had to speed it back up to get it back into a true like 100% speed file. But now you have the flexibility. You can have audio. Oh, and then the old cameras, you could not record audio if you were filming in 120 frames per second. So that's actually the biggest deal to me, is now I can shoot 120 frames per second with audio. Huge game changing. For example, if I'm filming elk bugling and fighting, there's times where I like to have the slow motion, but I'd also love to have that audio. I did not have that option in the prior generation. Same thing, I shoot a lot of loons from kayaks. And it's handheld, so I need to shoot in 120 frames per second because I rely on slow motion video to kind of take out my flaws of hand holding. But you know, so there were times where I was filming a video and all of a sudden the loons would call, and then I lost that audio because I didn't have the ability to record audio. So now I do. I love that. And I also love that they put the red box around the viewfinder so it's easier to tell when you're actually filming video now. In the prior generations, there were so many times where I would get in between cycles accidentally where I was hitting record, but in reality, I was actually stopping the video because I had accidentally somehow already started, and it just wasn't clear when you were filming. There was one little timer at the bottom and a little tiny REC in the top corner. It was really hard, at least for me, to see. Now it's very obvious when you're recording, so I love that. And lastly, as far as things go that I like, let's talk about the autofocus. So all the hype that was coming about this camera was this is supposed to be the best autofocus system in any camera ever. From everybody that I know that shoots sports or people or weddings, I'm hearing that's the case. For wildlife, I can't say definitively that that's the case so far. This camera did struggle at times recognizing hummingbirds. It would go to flowers and things like that. And there were some weird things like, you know, like in this video, I have a bright red macaw in a hole and it's going to the knot on the tree. You know, is that a big deal? Not really, because, you know, this was tended to be kind of a one-off. It wasn't the norm, but it was a little concerning that a bright red bird it can't find. And this camera also, just like every other mirrorless camera of any system that I've used, still struggles with this open perch syndrome, I call it, where you have a perch that's full frame in the screen and the camera just cannot focus on it. So a lot of times I'm finding myself manually focusing back to kind of give it a little boost, and then it would pick it up. Now, as I mentioned, this is every mirrorless camera. I've never found one that's really good at focusing on this. That said, the trick to this is mirrorless cameras always focus better near to far. So if you're waiting for something to land on that perch and you're concerned about missing it, you should pre-focus a little bit ahead of it, because the camera will naturally go from near to far much better than from the background to the foreground. And, you know, that doesn't help when you're focusing on the perch, it slips to the background and now you're stuck in this cycle. But again, just a little tip, if you're waiting for something to fly in, I tend to pre-focus just a little bit closer than the area I'm waiting for that bird to land, and it gives me a much higher success rate. Now, I did dial in a little bit more custom focus. Instead of doing the auto case, if you watch Ron Bielefeld, Whistling Wings Photography, he does a setup video on the R1, I set mine up the way he did, and it did seem a little bit better in my tests. But long story short, I, when I'm putting this right next to the R3, am I seeing a world of difference? No. In fact, there was actually times where I put the R1 down and I was shooting the R3 because it did seem a little bit more reliable for whatever reason. And the R5 II autofocus, despite not having all the cross type autofocus points, it really, I don't know, maybe it was just my experience, but it seemed to be more reliable. It was hitting, I just had better luck with the R5 II's autofocus for wildlife. I can't explain that. I can't quantify it. Just my personal experience. Now, had I never had, an R5 II or an R3 or anything like that, and I picked this camera up, would I think the autofocus is phenomenal? Of course, yes, it's definitely amazing. I don't know what I was hoping for because the R3 was already so good. And maybe that's the problem these days, is just that we've set the bar so high in these cameras that it's hard to top it. It's hard to see these huge incremental improvements. So, and maybe I just answered my own question out loud, but that's, again, just my experience. It's not mind-blowing, earth-shattering difference if you've already had a prior generation camera and you go to the R1. You're not going to be completely blown away with the autofocus, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that leads me to the last point. Should you get an R1? So, tough question. Number one, do you already have an R3? If not, simple answer, yes. If you can afford it, absolutely. Amazing camera. If you're a little worried more about the budget and you can live without the upgraded video features, and you can live without the PreCapture and 10 frames per second less photos, get an R3. You will not regret it. That's a phenomenal camera. It's going to be a phenomenal camera for a long time. The R1 being 60, whatever it is, over $6,000, is that worth it over the R3? Again, tough question. I think we were really lucky that the R3 was priced, if you want to call it, as low as it was, being that it was very similar to a 1 series camera, and all of those historically have been in the $6,000 range. And if you look at the A9 from Sony, that's in the $6,000 range as well. So I don't think that the R1 is unfairly priced. It's comparative to, its competitors and its predecessors. The problem is just that the R3 came out at a lower price point, so that kind of raised some eyebrows with the R1, I think. If you take the R3 out of the picture, I think that the R1 is justified at what it is. So for me, if I had to do it again, honestly, I think because I already have an R3, I probably would have gotten an R5 II first. I still think I would have gotten an R1 at some point, but I think I would have gone for the R5 II. Because that was the bigger upgrade over the R5 than the R1 was over the R3. But all in all, at the end of my rambling here of this long video, it's a lot longer than I expected to make this, I do think that this is a fantastic camera all around. To sum up, autofocus is very good, despite what I said about it. Low light performance is out of this world. You won't find a better camera at low light performance out there. I stand by that 100%. I don't care who makes it. Best low light camera in the market. Battery life, I didn't really talk about. Phenomenal. I think it's an upgrade from the R3. Dynamic range, which I also didn't talk about. I'm not seeing a huge difference from the R5 II. I think that the R5 II is a little bit better at recovering highlights and shadows, but it's also noisier. I think the R1 is very clean, even though it can't quite recover the same drastic dynamic range that the R5 can, but it's cleaner overall, so to me that's more valuable. So dynamic range is very good. I have no complaints there. Upgraded video specs, phenomenal. I love them. You get RAW with this camera. You get the XF AVC. You can get tighter you can get smaller codecs if you want to compress more. All around great video features. Autofocus is very good in video. No complaints there. I love having the audio now. Can't say enough about that. So yeah, like I said, it's a great camera. I don't think anybody would really be disappointed in it, honestly. unless for whatever reason you just can't handle the 24 megapixel, which would be absurd to me because you can still crop pretty decent amounts with 24 megapixels. Don't let the internet people tell you you can't. As with most first generation, new cameras, firmwares, etc., they tend to be a little bit buggy at times. As of making this video, the camera, when shooting large photo bursts and then trying to switch to video quick, as those photos are buffering, you get a pop-up that says busy, and it won't go to video until, I guess, all those photos right to the card. However, mine at times is just freezing at busy, and it'll never actually switch to video, which is frustrating the heck out of me because I like to switch back and forth very quickly in fast action moments, and I've lost quite a few videos. I do hope that gets fixed soon. I do report all these. I have a contact at Canon, so I'm reporting all the issues I have. This camera, for some reason, when switching to photos and videos, sometimes it just records a 1-second clip on its own without me hitting anything. It does this pretty regularly for me. I've noticed I'm coming home with like 20 or 30 1-second clips at times. So again, just another little bug. I'm hoping they address that. And it did, the most major issue that I've had on both the R5 II and the R1 is it completely froze on me a couple times to the point I had to pull the battery. But one of the times it actually reset all of my settings back to stock settings, and I was not happy about that. I didn't actually realize it quite at first, and I thought I was still filming video in 4K, and turns out it was all in 1080 because it had reset all my settings, and I didn't know it. It only did that once. It hasn't done it again since. I have had freezes since, but that's kind of a big issue. I'm hoping that never happens again, and that was just a one-off. I don't know, just reporting, what I'm experiencing so far. And that actually reminds me, last but not least, I will talk about overheating. I shot hundreds of hours of video, no overheating whatsoever. I shot raw. I shoot 120 almost exclusively, 120 frames per second, no overheating. So very pleased in that department as well, which was always my case with the R3 as well. I know a lot of people have responded to me that their R3s have overheated. Mine never have. So anyway, all right, without making this video any longer, I will probably do some follow-ups. If you guys have questions, stuff that I didn't cover, please leave me comments, and maybe I can do a follow-up to this one because I've drawn this out a lot longer than I expected to as it is, and I don't need to ramble on anymore. So like I said, any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them down below, and I will try my best to either address them or make another video as soon as I can. And thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it.